Hi, my name is John Morrison, and Twitter is one of my favorite things.
If Twitter still stays, I am at Monica_REIDA.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and it is Sunday, November 27th. It is the Sunday of a very long weekend. Thanksgiving was on Thursday. My sleep schedule has been pushed more and more every day, in part because I'm listening to the Mike Nichols biography that people were talking about on podcasts during peak quarantine. Everybody seemed to be listening to this biography, and I had some Audible credits to use up because I don't know how to cancel a subscription. And so I've spent most of this weekend just playing games on my phone and listening to this biography of Mike Nichols and just being blown away by how much he accomplished. First, by the time he was 30, now he's about 40 where I've hit in my book, and he just is like part of every pop culture scene in the 60s. And, you know, we're getting into the 70s now. So that is almost all I've done this weekend is lay on the couch listening to Mike Nichols' life. Although, of course, I had a lovely dinner with friends, had a fire pit because the weather this weekend demanded a fire pit. And then finally got my act together and edited a 2-interview episode. I interviewed both Monica Reida, who you may remember from Murdoch Mysteries, and John Morrison about Twitter, about a shared favorite thing that I've been using since 2007, that I am very disheartened and sad to see what it's doing under the private ownership of the world's richest man, and feeling pretty like, what can I do to save it? I don't know. So I don't have a plan for where I go if Twitter does crash and burn the way it seems to be going, or if it just becomes a bastion of evil, which it also seems to be becoming. But this episode is not about that. It is about the things we loved on a website that we used for close to 15 years, that we used to meet people, to learn, to get recommendations, for everything from TV to jeans to restaurants in new towns. It allowed us serendipity when we were traveling, when we would realize we were in the same city as someone. So many fun things happened with Twitter. So this is an episode about the things we loved about the hell site dumpster fire known as Twitter. And I could have interviewed another 10 people. I could have done this as a call-in show. I may have more episodes about Twitter because I really do think during peak Twitter, pre-2016, maybe pre-2013, it was just this magical place. And it's a website that I have really loved, that I have made so many of my adult friends on. And I was just happy to sit down with Monica and John and talk about their experiences on Twitter. So without further ado, please enjoy this episode of Finding Favorites. And in the meantime, wash your hands, wear your mask, get your booster, get your flu shot, and keep enjoying your favorite things. Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we get people's recommendations without using an algorithm. This is also either part 1, part 2, or part 3 of a very special episode about why we love Twitter. I'm here today with return guest Monica Reida, joining me live from Milwaukee. Someone I only know from Twitter, which is a perfect way to talk about why we love Twitter.
Yes.
How are you doing?
Sure. I'm doing well, although I feel like you might have been at like one of the Zoom misspokens I performed at.
Oh, yeah.
So, but again, we haven't
likely.
But given the years I lived in Chicago, we've never actually met in person, which is, I think that was when I've been thinking about reasons why I love Twitter. That was like a huge thing, was that there are so many people in Chicago that I've only met recently in like the past, I think maybe 5 years. So long after I've moved away, or there are people I'm like, oh yeah, this person is like my friend, and I've never met them at all in Chicago. So yeah, it actually kind of works well, and you're one of them.
And you are too. It's really. So I'll zoom out a little bit. What's your Twitter origin story? When did you join? How did you find it?
So I realized I'm going to be doing a lot of aging myself and revealing, hi, I'm a millennial. So I remember being in high school in journalism, and my high school journalism teacher came up to me and he said, what the hell is this Twitter thing? Do you know anything about it? And I'm not sure why he decided Monica is the person who should be our like school newspaper Twitter guinea pig.
Okay.
So I was like, I vaguely know what it's about. I don't really use it. And I remember joining Twitter, and I think so I had been on Twitter either in 2008 or 2009, not with my current handle. And I remember like the first people I followed, I think it was like the New York Times. I remember the writer David Carr was one of them. Because he was one of I think one of the kind of great Twitter users, if we can say that.
Yeah, of course we can say that.
Yeah. And I remember following my girlfriend at the time. So it was like very much like I think what you would expect a high school journalist to follow.
Right. Follow some big personalities from major newspapers, and also your friends and your girlfriend.
Yes.
Like hyper local and celebrity journalists.
Exactly. And I remember then writing a op-ed for our school newspaper, and I even illustrated it with like a bunch of like birds just like tweeting, like kind of speaking tweets. And saying, I was like, Twitter's great, ignore the fact that like Ashton Kutcher is buying billboards in our city, which was an actual thing that was happening in Iowa.
As he was trying to get to 1 million followers.
Yes.
Right, because he went to he went to college in Iowa, or is he from Iowa?
I believe he's from Iowa. I tend to usually more so remember that Elijah Wood and Ron Livingston are Iowans. Because especially people in Cedar Rapids are like, they're like our sons. Yeah. But I think Ashton Kutcher's from Iowa. And so I was like, this is actually brilliant. It was around this, and especially with like political turmoil in the Middle East, I was like, this is a great way for, knowing what your friends are doing. And I think also knowing what is happening globally. So that was my origin story. And then I remember moving to Chicago for college, and I didn't even have an avatar that was a photo of myself. I just had like one of those like cartoon avatars you could generate. The pre-Pick Crew Me. Yeah. I think it was like a Mad Men inspired one.
It was a very popular, or in the aughts, a very popular way to launch TV shows, second seasons of TV shows. It was kind of after, it wasn't Elf Me. There was this like website where you could put your face on a dancing elf for Christmas.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I also remember when the Simpsons movie came out, like Fox did a whole thing where it was like Simpsonize yourself. And so it was actually funny. I would go to the Court Theater and see shows, and people who followed me because they liked my theater opinions on Twitter. So this is like back when I was like part of like the kind of fledgling parts of theater Twitter. So those people were like, would like come up to me at the Court Theater and be like, "Oh, you're Monica Reida." And then I was like, this is, I'm 17, I'm a college student. I'm like, this is weird. You recognize me from my cartoon avatar. And I'm like, well, I guess that's a good likeness.
Right. That's wild. Yeah.
So, and then I got kind of sick of theater Twitter for a bunch of reasons. And I actually deactivated my Twitter account, I think in 2011.
Okay.
But then I had started writing for Gaper's Block, and I was like, oh, wait, I actually kind of need a Twitter account if I'm promoting my journalism. And so I got back on, and...
Yeah, you need it to promote it and also find sources, eavesdrop, find out what's getting tipped off and stuff about what's happening. Right.
And another thing for me as a young journalist was a lot of writers who I respected the hell out of, Wet Moser, Scott Smith. Those were people who would like amplify and promote my work. And as this young journalist, it kind of meant the world for me to see, these journalists I followed in Chicago that I respected immensely talking about my work. And so I've been at my current handle, which is just at Monica_Reida. And I think like my initial handle was just Reida. I don't know why I couldn't have Monica Reida as one word. I think it was like some weird thing. I'm gonna blame my sister. That's how it works as the oldest.
Yep.
And I've just been there since 2011.
Yeah. I joined in 2007, March of 2007, during the South by Southwest when it was getting the first wave of it getting big, which was tiny, right? Like,
right.
But I worked at Edelman in a group painfully now named the Me Too Revolution. That was our team name. We just kind of, Steve Rubel was on my team, Phil Gomes, and there was just a lot of pressure to like join every site as soon as you could get a beta invitation. So I've been on Twitter since then. At that time I was at Leah Jones, and then I switched to Chicago Leah in probably 2010. I deleted the original account. It got big. It got to like 8,000 followers.
Okay.
Because I was on so early that I was on like all these tech bros that I don't follow anymore, but we all followed each other at the time because there weren't so many people. And so I would come up as suggested, or people would be like, oh, well, Scoble follows her, or Rubel, or these guys follow her. I'll follow her back. So I was kind of growing an audience that I wasn't comfortable with, that didn't make sense. And I would get recognized. And I just got super uncomfortable with it. So I deleted that account and started over. Also because at the time I was working with small businesses and small artists and musicians. And I was like, well, I can't tell if my advice works when my advice is with an account that's from like year one of Twitter that grew exponentially in ways that don't exist anymore. So I kind of told myself this is also so that I can give advice based on what Twitter is today. So I've had this handle then since 2009, 2010.
Okay. Well, and I think going with that, what actually works idea, even with like being on Twitter in 2011 with my current account, I would have these moments of when I was at Michigan State then finishing my bachelor's degree. I remember journalists from like the Detroit Free Press and the Associated Press. They would come into my classes and they would say like, your Twitter account only should be you tweeting out links of your articles. And I also remember we were told to get like Twitter and Pinterest for a class.
Yeah.
So again, get on all of the platforms. And so I remember, and then we had to like be graded on our professional presentation on these platforms.
Oh, wow.
And I remember getting the feedback because for the longest time, my Twitter bio was just like fancy person from Chicago, because I once reviewed a children's production of The Hobbit in Iowa. I was invited to review it. And I gave it a lukewarm review. Actually, some people saw the show and they're like, you should have been more harsh. And I was like, but I gave the review of the performance I saw. That was the review I felt it deserved. And of course, the mothers of the actors lost it. And one of the mothers, because I had just come back from being at DePaul, she pretty much was like, you're some like elitist who's trying to force an unreasonable standard on our kids. And she called me a fancy person from Chicago. And so for the longest time, my Twitter bio was just like, fancy person from Chicago, politics writer at Gapers Block. And that was my Twitter bio. And then I think once I got off to Michigan State, it was like journalism student, Michigan State University, and then my graduation year. And I remember being told I couldn't have fancy person from Chicago in my bio because that wasn't professional. And I remember sitting there and thinking, but people on the editorial board at the Tribune and writers at the Sun-Times follow me. I think I can do this.
Right.
Which is that weird cockiness of like, I've been on this site. I think I know what I'm doing.
Right.
And then also it's like, but I probably should change it so I don't upset my instructors.
Yeah, change it until you get the grade and then you can always change it back.
Right.
Yeah. So I know that recently, by recently, I mean in the last 6 months, you did come to Chicago and play Magic the Gathering with Terry Gant at Third Coast Comics.
Yes.
Which to me is an ultimate Twitter story, is that Terry and I met at a nacho tweet up, probably in 2008, instant friends. And then you both did segments on my Best of 2021 episode. He heard you talk about Magic, found you on Twitter, and then what I know is then I see some tweets about you guys talk about Magic the Gathering and possibly AEW wrestling, and then that you're in town playing Magic with him.
Yes.
So to me, that is like the ultimate why Twitter is amazing story. And even though, sure, there was a podcast in the middle, it's all Twitter to me. It's all the DNA of all of it is using Twitter.
Oh yeah, because I remember finding out from Terry that I think he'd like reached out to you and said, I want to be friends with the Magic the Gathering lady.
He did.
And so then he followed me, and I was familiar with Third Coast Comics, having lived in Chicago. And so I was like, oh, sweet. I'm totally following this guy.
Yeah.
And we start talking about Magic the Gathering. And it's actually kind of weird for me because one of our alder people in Milwaukee is like one of like the premier Magic the Gathering players of a certain format.
Oh, that's great.
So like, it's weird. It's great. I found this out when I was at a fundraiser for our county executive. Because I had brought someone who's a Magic the Gathering player with me, and he was like, "Hey, how are you?" And I was like, "Okay, you've got to like fill me in what's going on." So it's actually weird. I now have like people who play Magic the Gathering who aren't like, because there are people who are like, who have careers as like professional Magic the Gathering players who like go on Twitch and stream playing Magic the Gathering. So there are definitely people who are like really big in the Magic the Gathering community. But it's very weird that I now have like multiple people who follow me, and I'll tweet out something about like a card I pulled in a booster, and Terry and then this older person are like, oh my god, like here are some great deck ideas you could do with this. And I have told Terry that we have someone on our city council now who is like a huge Magic the Gathering player.
I love it.
So it's fun that I follow someone who will like tweet about like Magic the Gathering and then also like why it is a horrible idea to widen the interstates in Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
And what we can do to keep like a very like busy bar party district safe for pedestrians. You know, which ultimately is what I want on Twitter.
Right.
So yeah, and Terry and I have actually developed a really great friendship. And I would say he's not just the only person I've met through Twitter where I've developed a great friendship with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember eventually he actually like invited me to a Discord with a bunch of people he plays Dungeons and Dragons with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a thing where it was like, initially it was like, oh, Monica plays Magic the Gathering. And I'm like, oh, you play Magic the Gathering too. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I got into a funk where I was like, I didn't want to play Magic the Gathering. And then I told Terry about, Terry and I both started talking about like games we'd play of Arena, which is the kind of like online form of Magic the Gathering.
Okay.
So we would seriously like send each other in our DMs like screenshots of like crazy things that we were doing during these games. And then Terry would start like got me onto this Discord. I'm still, by the way, with everyone talking about Twitter alternatives, I will admit I've been on Discord for like the past like maybe 9 months and I still am trying to figure it out.
Right.
Then I'm talking with him, and actually in July, I actually deactivated my Twitter account. I thought I wasn't coming back to Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just because of stuff that was going on in my personal life. And Terry actually like reached out to me. He was genuinely concerned, and that really meant the world to me. And so we're talking, and tying into last week's episode, I had mentioned I was going to go to King's Spa over the weekend.
Yes.
And I was like, because he was like, oh, I would love to like play Magic the Gathering with you like in person. And I was like, well, I'm going to King's Spa next weekend. And it was just like, I was like, I'm driving down. I'm pretty sure I can like go to King's Spa, get a treatment for my skin, sit in a million of the sauna rooms.
Yep.
Eat some bibimbap, and then, you know, I can go play Magic the Gathering afterwards.
Yeah. That's a double header. It's a great day.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then I went to H Mart afterwards.
Yes.
Except Terry was also like, you could have gone to H Mart beforehand and just put stuff in my fridge. And I was like, I didn't know.
Right. Fair.
And so, yeah, that ended up like, that was like this ultimate culmination. And I feel like kind of the perfect kind of like, maybe success story from this podcast is that I was like, after listening to Jasmine Davila talk so much about how much she loves King's Spa, I was like, I have to go to King's Spa someday.
Yay!
So I just like, I went to King's Spa, and I went and played Magic the Gathering with Terry. And so now Terry is trying to convince me to go and play Magic the Gathering at the game stores in Milwaukee.
Okay.
Which we don't actually and I will be honest, we don't have game stores actually in Milwaukee. They're all in the suburbs.
Oh, okay.
But there is one where if I take a bus that literally stops right outside of my office building, it'll get me to that game store. And the staff there is really good. They're still, until recently, they required proof of vaccination to play. And they are still requiring masks for all in-person playing of any type of game.
That's awesome.
And the staff there is great. I have like stuck my foot in and been a total noob in front of all of like the staff members, and they've still been really wonderful and nice to me.
Yeah. Well, either you let people into the game and let them learn, or your sales stop. So it behooves them to be welcoming. Also, it behooves all of us to be welcoming, not just for capitalism.
Yes, exactly. So Terry has been like, you need to show up like you've just come from like a deposition. You've got like your head is held high, and you are going to just completely destroy them with like 16 Kraken tokens. Which is the move I would play, because he knows that I'm very much the type of Magic the Gathering player where I'm like, and now I'm going to destroy you with my giant creatures.
Amazing. I'm curious. Well, do you have any other of those sort of like magical, but not necessarily Magic the Gathering Twitter moments from kind of peak Twitter, or like when you were in Chicago and doing Gaper's Block and I don't know. I just love Twitter stories like this.
So I remember, and as we've established, I'm a big fan of wrestling. When I was the politics editor at Gaper's Block, I was going to one of the writers as we were leading into the 2015 mayoral election. He wrote a column where he actually kind of accurately predicted that Bob Fioretti was going to do a heel turn and end up siding with Rahm Emanuel. Which is very weird to now look back and be like, wow, that was actually very, very accurate and predictable. And I remember reading it and being like, I love this because you're using a wrestling analogy. This is exactly in my wheelhouse. And then I'm also sitting there going, I'm not sure if our readership is going to go for this. And I remember I kind of like vaguely tweeted about it. And I think if you have been in Chicago media, you're familiar with Mr. JM.
Yeah, of course.
And he was like,
the world's most anonymous, Chicago's most anonymous Twitter user.
Yes, but also I remember when he got banned from Twitter, like everybody, he did. He actually had to start over with a new account.
I'm trying to remember if I know that. I guess so.
Yeah, and I remember like finding out because I remember seeing Brandon Wall, now of BuzzFeed, formerly of the Sun-Times, and Craig Newman, also formerly of the Sun-Times, that they were like, what the hell? What's going on? And then like, kind of like everyone in Chicago media Twitter just was like, free Mr. JM. And I remember Mr. JM like responded and he was like, well, now I'm intrigued and I want to see how this works. And I think that was like the push I needed to be like, okay, I'm keeping this in. I'm going to see how this works out.
Yeah.
And then I ended up publishing it. And quite strangely, in 2015, there were like Bob Fioretti fanboys. I wonder how that's working out for them with his political trajectory. Right. And so they were mad because they were like, oh, you're saying he's going to do something bad. And then we all saw what happened with that election. But then I remember Mr. JM reading it and being like, oh, this is perfect. I love it. And that was like, and especially because for me, it was this thing where I very much recognize that I've had to deal with a lot of like more crap as a woman on the internet, especially a female journalist.
Yeah.
It's when someone like that who, and I feel like, you know, as you said, he's Chicago's most anonymous, but I feel like famous Twitter user.
Right.
You know, a Chicago party aunt wishes she had the respect Mr. JM has.
Right. Also, I would absolutely watch a Netflix show. And if Mr. JM wants to stay anonymous, fine. It would be Richard. It would be Robert Lorzell would be the non-anonymous face of it. And Mr. JM would be the anonymous face of it. And an introduction to like independent music in Chicago with the two of them.
I feel like
in front of the camera and one off camera in the shadows.
I think that would be perfect. And you know, you would definitely get like John Langford, I feel like would probably, you know, I think that would be like the perfect kind of show.
Yeah.
So that was like a big moment and kind of similar to that, having done research on fandoms in, and the law. When I wrote an article for Alma on the Jewish wrestling villain, MJF, I had this whole moment going into it of what if the fans and the MJF stands, and there are definitely MJF stands out there.
Right.
Wrestling stan Twitter is very much a weird kind of terrifying place. But I was like, what if the stans and the fans don't like this and I have to like go private for a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
But then it got published and I'm getting these tweets from people whose handles are like at MJFlover8769 or something. And they're like, OMG. And then like sobbing emoji, sobbing emoji, sobbing emoji.
Oh.
You totally understand like why he's a heel and you totally get his character.
Oh.
And that was this, like, again, it's this moment of validation, especially as a writer, where it's, oh, the fans who are like diehard, absolutely adore this wrestler, love my article and are retweeting it.
Mm-hmm.
This feels great. I will also say in like kind of niche Chicago Twitter, and I've actually met like people who have like, I've gotten coffee, I've like developed, Scott Smith, I remember as like a young journalist, I like got coffee at a Lavazza in Streeterville to just talk about journalism and talk about social media with him.
Yep.
That was another lovely experience. I do also, I think it was very weird. I remember going on WBEZ to talk about an article, but then this was, I remember Wet Moser including an article I had written in like his weekly roundup of articles you should read in Chicago. And that felt, even though it was printed, it wasn't on Twitter. I knew Wet followed me on Twitter.
Yeah.
And seeing that, I think, was more gratifying than going on WBZ. Also, that didn't include the, feeling like I was going to throw up all over Navy Pier.
Fair, yes.
So those are just like a couple of the lovely experiences I've had. And I've been thinking also, if we have the time, I've been thinking also about how valuable Twitter has been as we've like kind of with streaming, our collective consciousness of what shows to watch has been kind of fractured a little bit.
Right.
Like, again, I'm going to age myself, but like one of my big, like starting with postings, I was on LiveJournal and I posted all the time on LiveJournal, wrote so much fan fiction on LiveJournal. It's not even funny. But Television Without Pity, RIP Television Without Pity, one of my favorite sites. I would post a lot in the forums there. And I think about, you definitely knew like, okay, you've got everything that's on network TV. Maybe there's like some crazy show on FX.
Right.
And then you've got the stuff on the premium cable channels. But that was it. And you could keep on top of all of those shows. And I was thinking that like right now, I think Twitter has been almost indispensable for me finding out what shows to watch. I have friends who are film and television scholars, and so sometimes they'll be like, we'll sit down and we'll be like, oh, I've started watching this show. This is what I think about it. I definitely like listened at my Yom Kippur break fast to a friend talk about his thoughts on the new Interview with the Vampire show.
Oh, right. I've heard that happened.
Yeah.
There's so many. And that's the thing is that without Twitter for TV recommendations from people you follow, you were left only with the algorithm.
Right.
You were and what Netflix decides to put on your homepage, what Amazon, what they decide you want to see, which just funnels you smaller and smaller into like viewing habits where Twitter can help you break out of that.
Well, and I thought immediately of kind of in the last year, 3 shows that I ended up watching because of Twitter and loving. And Abbott Elementary, I think, is kind of like the big one. I think a lot of us, we saw everybody on, like people we followed on Twitter say like Abbott Elementary is gut-bustingly funny. And then it's, okay, well, I've got to check this out on Hulu. Right. And that's now become a whole thing where I'm like, okay, it's Thursday. I'm going home, I'm making dinner, and then I'm curling up on the couch with a cup of tea and I'm watching the latest Abbott Elementary.
Yeah.
So there's that. Severance is also another show. I think I saw a bunch of ads for it. That was before I had something I could stream Apple TV on my TV for. And so finally enough people were saying Severance is brilliant. I was like, okay, I'm going to like muddle through it. I'm watching it on my laptop. And I've now watched Severance twice because I thought it was so brilliant. But then another show is on Netflix, and I think Netflix would have never recommended it to me. Most of my recommendations on Netflix are like costume dramas and K-dramas. And then, of course, the K-dramas that are set in like Joseon, I just massacred that, probably, apologies. But like in like late 1700s, early 1800s Korea.
Yeah, okay.
So like those are most of my Netflix recommendations. And I saw people on Twitter talking about the show Arcane.
Okay.
And that's based, like, it's kind of like a prelude and like an expansion on the world building of League of Legends. It's a show I never would watch in the first place. Because even though I do play video games, and actually I'm playing a video game series because someone one of my mutuals on Twitter, he had tweeted about it, and finally I was like, you know what, I want to play this game. It looks fun as hell.
Well, what game is that?
The Yakuza series.
Okay.
And the whole premise is most of it, I'm currently in Yakuza 0, which is kind of like it actually ended up being a prequel because they had come out with like 5 other games initially. And so you are playing as Kiryu, and in the first game, he's like this very young member of the Yakuza in Japan, but he's been framed for killing someone. And the storytelling is kind of incredible because it's like, here he is, and it's like tied to like a huge like real estate boom in Japan in the late 1980s. And it's become a game where and so you have to play as him, and he like leaves the Yakuza in this game so that he can try to like clear his name and try to figure out, you know, what's going on, and also kind of like restore a little. You get the sense that there's like also kind of, you know, the mentor of his who was one of the bosses in the Yakuza and is now in prison, kind of, you know, kind of like restoring some like respect in himself with this person in the Yakuza. And the relationships between him and the other main characters, the storytelling, it's really great. And I will, you know, sometimes I'm just like, well, I want to kill like 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. I'll play this game.
Yep.
But then there are moments where I'm like, I want to know what happens next in Yakuza 0. And so I've like actually went out and bought an Xbox console and like thought all of that through just so I could play that game, because someone I follow on Twitter was like playing this game, like, this game looks awesome, I want to play it.
Amazing. I love it.
But yeah, Arcane, going back to that was a show I think I never would have learned about in the first place. And I ended up watching it, loving every second of it. And I now feel like the weird hill I will die on is you have to watch Arcane. I think it's just like, and it's a brilliant animated show that manages to be adult without, I think when we think about a lot of adult animation, it's very crass. It's very, I think it comes, and this does have blood, but it's more, I think, cerebral and kind of devastating. It was a show where I went in with the lowest expectations because I'm like, it's on Netflix and it's based on League of Legends. How good can it be? And finished the show with like, I need season 2 ASAP. This was amazing.
I love it.
So I think like that's actually, I think, might be the 2 biggest holes, I think, if Twitter completely falls apart, which some people are saying it will, some people are saying it'll still be here in 3 weeks. I think the holes that I will see, especially as someone who's like on Mastodon now, you know, I'm on Mastodon and I'm on a server for French-speaking feminists, queers, and anti-fascists.
That is very specific.
I think also data collection is a real thing, because when I went to join, I was like, we think you would most like this server. And I was like, yes, I would. So I end up learning a lot about, you know, things that for example, non-monogamous or polyamorous couples may have in terms of legality, which I work in the law. That is something that interests me.
Yeah.
But other than anime shows that people are just kind of like tweeting about with posting on Mastodon without context.
Right.
I'm not getting that same kind of sense of, oh, this is the thing that's really good.
Yeah.
And I think even if you are following people, like, let's say you follow a bunch of journalists, you can still find people who will say like, oh, Andor is really great. You know, it manages, even though I think there is a little bit of this kind of echo chamber that happens on Twitter, it's not to the same extent as you get with, you know, Mastodon, for example.
Right.
And no one is, I mean, I might post memes about the shows that I love. You follow me on Instagram, so you see that I post, you know, stuff about Murdoch mysteries all the time because I'm like, Murdoch.
I mean, truly, I don't know, through the podcast, you are responsible for so many people watching that series, and I recommend it to people all the time. I watched all of season 1 and then fell off, but like my upstairs neighbor Ezra watched all 15 seasons. My mom watched a ton of it. I mean, you were only on a year ago, maybe a little bit more than a year ago, because I watched it after I had surgery. But responsible for so many people, and when I see people asking about shows, like Jackie Cation, who's a stand-up comic, was asking about shows, and she had an episode about cozy mysteries. And I was listening to the episode, and I sent her a tweet, and I was like, oh my God, what about Murdoch mysteries? She's like, don't worry, we get there. But I hope the people at the CBC understand what you've done for them.
And I'm going to Canada next week. Well, by the time this drops, it'll be, you know, this week. Yeah. And I'm having to tell myself that I can't just stay in my hotel and catch up with the latest season because, of course, it's all blocked based on your IP address. But if I'm in Canada, it's, you know, oh, you're in Canada, you can access the CBC streaming site. So I'm like, you can't just stay in your hotel and catch up on the latest season of Murdoch Mysteries.
Why not? I'm an enabler, so what if it's very cold?
It probably will be. So I might just, you know, get off my plane, check into the hotel, get a bite to eat, and then go back, maybe make a cup of tea, and start watching the latest season of Murdoch.
Just watch a couple episodes.
I couldn't watch a couple seasons because it's that rare Canadian show where they give it like 22 episodes to a season.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think, and it's very interesting because like I'll post stuff about wrestling, I'll post stuff about Murdoch on Instagram, but people aren't, you know, replying like, what the hell are you talking about? Right. While if I tweet about Murdoch, there is this, you know, I think we think about it as engagement. And I even know like your mom has tweeted at me and been like, I love Murdoch because you love Murdoch.
Yes.
So I think that's going to be the thing I'm going to miss the most. But I think, you know, it really is the connections. I've commented to people, I think because of Twitter, I have gained friends in Chicago after moving away. And that's not something that happens, I think, really in society. You don't move away from a city and then you have
get
more
to know
friends.
People. Right.
Yeah. So it's like I've got all of the friends from when I lived in Chicago. And then there are people where it's like, oh, if I move back to Chicago or if I'm in Chicago, I should be like, hey, like, let's go grab a bite to eat. Let's go get a cup of coffee.
Right. Absolutely.
So, and I think those are the things, I mean, I'm going to miss the most about Twitter. I will also say that the times I have gone viral have been for the most surprising things ever. And the most notable is that after it was announced that the Thompson Center in Chicago was being sold to Google, I tweeted out I was like, this is Chicago Twitter today. And I tweeted out that meme of Anakin Skywalker and Padme. Where it's like Anakin is saying something and Padme is like smiling. And then Anakin looks like kind of serious. And then Padme looks like very nervous. And so it was Anakin saying like, Google is taking over the Thompson Center, and Padme saying, but the Sparrow is going to stay. And then it has Anakin, and then it's, but the Sparrow is going
to stay. Yeah.
And I think I got like, last I checked, I had like 1,500 likes on it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this is the dumbest thing I could possibly think of. And it took off. And it
found an audience.
It did. I think, you know, I think the weirder thing is one time I tweeted about the like kind of collective differences in how we talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg as opposed to Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Mm-hmm. And that when Ginsburg dissents, people are like, yes, queen. Mm-hmm. But when Sotomayor dissents, it's she lashed out. Mm-hmm. And I think I might have responded to a tweet from Eve Ewing. Mm-hmm. And it was hilarious. I like responded to that, and then I ended up in the hospital in New York.
Oh.
And then I got out of the hospital, and I have like 1 million notifications on Twitter. It's gotten like so many responses, like thousands of likes, and then I was like, what the hell happened? And that was a little surreal. Usually when I've gone viral, I can like watch it in live watch it as it's unfolding. This, I was like, I tweeted it out. I didn't think of it. Was in the hospital, and then 2 days later, I'm like looking at Twitter. I'm like, what the fuck happened?
What's going on? Right. What does this all lead back to? She's back on Twitter briefly.
I saw.
She came for the end.
It feels very much like I've seen people say this is like when your favorite bar is closing. Mm-hmm. And it feels like everybody is like showing up to be like, hey, I haven't like been in years, but got to be here for that one last hurrah.
Yeah, it really does feel like that. So, well, Monica, thank you for spending some of your Saturday morning with me.
Of course.
Where can people find you on the internet? Do you want to be found on the internet by people?
I think hilariously with Twitter, if Twitter goes away, my kind of internet footprint becomes a little bit smaller. Mm-hmm. So if Twitter goes away, and my Twitter is currently private just because of troll stuff I've been dealing with this year. So if Twitter still stays, I am at Monica_Reida. Gotta spell that out because it's that weird Welsh name. Mm-hmm. If you are on Instagram and you like photos of architecture and me posting in my stories about movies and pro wrestling and Murdoch mysteries, mm-hmm. and how much I love Llewellyn Watts and his relationship to pretzels. You can find me on Instagram at MONICAREIDA. So that's my name, all one word. I am on Mastodon.
This is not a video podcast, but I wish I had. I'm not going to, but a GIF of your face saying that you're on Mastodon is hysterical.
And there I am at Sentient Cabbage at Eldritch, like an Eldritch Abomination, mm-hmm. .cafe. And then I am also on a platform called Pillow Fort, which is largely for artists to post their work in progress. Mm-hmm. I have actually been getting back into drawing. Another thing that has happened from the lovely Twitter connection with Terry Gant is he's been encouraging me to draw. And we've been talking about artwork. But because Pillow Fort is a little more looser with what you can and can't post, mm-hmm. I am also on Pillow Fort at Sentient Cabbage. There is a very dumb reason why it's Sentient Cabbage, but it's very much, I work in the law right now, and maybe if there's like that little mm-hmm. bit of making it harder for people to find me, then I'm not having, the managing partner have people say, hey, one of your employees is posting drawings of sexy tentacled aliens. Mm-hmm. So that is where you can find me.
Great.
I had a Tumblr at one point. I don't know what happened to my Tumblr. I don't think I can get back into my Tumblr because it was tied to an email I lost access to ages ago. So I'm not telling you where to find me on Tumblr. Otherwise, I would go back on Tumblr.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
I would go back on Tumblr, but I'm like, I don't want to start from scratch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Great. Well, have a good afternoon, and
You as
long
well.
live Twitter.
Yes, Twitter is dead. Long live Twitter.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is part 2 of the episode about why we love Twitter. And I am so pleased because I am joined this morning with one of my friends that I met in the earliest days of Chicago Twitter. You may know him as the local celebrity. His name is John Morrison. He is a technologist and activist here in Chicago. And happy birthday, John. How are you today?
Thank you. Yeah, there's no "the" on the handle. It's just at local celebrity. But
Wow, I've added that "the" for a long time.
it doesn't fit character number wise.
Yeah. So you know him as local celebrity John Morrison.
Yeah, which was intended to be ironic. It
Yeah.
was supposed to be funny, and then people thought it was an ego play, and I've just rolled with it.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I never thought you were trying to be serious with it. So I always got the joke.
cool.
I think.
Yeah, well, I'm really happy to be here, Leah. I listened to your episode with Jasmine about medieval times to prep, which was delightful. Jasmine's delightful. You're delightful, but
Thank you.
So is medieval times. So that's great.
Yeah, it made me need. I haven't been since her 40th birthday trip, so I need to make another plan to go out.
That's when I went last too. So.
Yeah. So as we were talking, and I was like, "What should I call you?" One of the things you said was affordable housing activist, and I want to have today. We're really specifically going to talk about Twitter, but this is your official invitation back to talk about your personal journey to becoming an activist. Because as a friend who has been separated from you by the pandemic, I've watched your evolution online, but we haven't ever sat down and had a big conversation about it. So I just want to put a pin in it that it is something that I have wanted to know about and have been meaning to talk to you about, and this dumb pandemic got in the way. So I just want to say, like, I've noticed it. It's been fascinating. I'm so excited that you have the energy to get out there and fight, and that you have the thick skin to like really get out there and fight. And I want to know more.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it sometime. It's also very intermingled with the topic of Twitter and why we love it and why we hate it. I mean, I actually kind of regularly have white nationalists in my mentions because they don't like the things I'm up to. It's a very fascinating time to be alive.
Yeah. Let's do some time traveling. Were you already in Chicago when you joined Twitter, or were you still in New York?
I was still in New York. I moved to Chicago in May of 2007, and I joined Twitter in March of 2007.
Okay.
So, and it was Twitter debuted, I think, in like mid 2006. So I was a relatively early adopter, though there's a lot of people who were much earlier than I was. And when I was moving out here, I knew very few people. I didn't know much of what to do, and it was a place where I could just post into the void, and like use it to sort of explore, and found communities of people through it, really, just by posting into the void.
Yeah, because Chicago Twitter at that time. Well, I also joined March of 2007 because that was the South by Southwest where it debuted. It had, right, like they had launched it in 2006, but that was the South by when people started using it to try and, I think, just find each other at bars. You know, it was still like there were no apps. It was still text message based, and it could function on very little battery power at the time.
Yeah, I didn't have a smartphone. Or I guess I didn't have a smartphone yet because the iPhone hadn't come out yet. Which is strange to think about. And I didn't go to South by until 2009.
Right.
I was a nerd kid who worked at an Apple store, who was read a lot of tech blogs and kept hearing about this thing. So finally I checked it out. And the fact that you could post via SMS, I was doing that with my dumb phone, like my old Sony Ericsson phones.
Yeah, just with a T9. Is that what those?
Yep. Yeah.
Little bloop, bloop, bloop,
T9
bloop, bloop.
keyboard.
Huh. I must have had a BlackBerry when I joined Twitter because I was at Edelman.
I'm pretty sure you had a BlackBerry at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember it.
Yeah. It was so cool. Actually, I loved my BlackBerry. And I held on to it as long as possible. Do you remember? So you joined it kind of as prep for moving to Chicago, or it really took hold for you when you got here and you're like, oh, this is a way I can start finding things and finding people?
I joined it as a curiosity. And then it turned out to have that side effect of it. Mm-hmm. And working at an Apple store, you're in especially a flagship Apple store with what they call a flagship Apple store with like 300 people. You meet a lot of other like-minded nerds. It's kind of like an incubator for weird technology interests. So I found other colleagues who were on Twitter or were, I'm standing behind the studio, as they called it, the equivalent to the Genius Bar, where we taught people how to use a computer. And I would sign in, and I would post from the Apple Store. I probably shouldn't say that.
I think the statute of limitations is on wasting time on the floor is over.
I just hope that, if I ever decide to go back to Apple, that Tim Cook doesn't hold that against me. Mm-hmm. I know he's really efficiency minded. Anyway, and it just found other people who were doing it. Some of the other creatives, some of the other people who I worked with were doing it, and we're connecting with other individuals in the city, had friends on it. I started connecting to their friends, and eventually I somehow found out that the Chicago Tribune, who at the time was quite prolific on Twitter, was hosting a meetup, or as they called it, a tweet up, at the Clark Street Ale House. And I wound up going to that sort of on a whim. It was a very short walk from the Apple Store. It was actually like the place that a lot of us would go after work to have a beer. And I met a whole bunch of media and agency people there who were early adopters. I don't know if I met you at the first one of those, but I mean, I eventually met through doing that. I met a whole bunch of Trib people, some of which I still see. I met you. I met Andrew Huff, who used to run Gaper's Block and now runs 20 by 2 and is just a wonderful person. It was an exposure to a whole different group of people that I wouldn't have normally, like-minded people that I wouldn't have normally crossed over with because I was just a kid working at a retail store,
Yeah. Yeah, I think Daniel Honigman, when he was tweeting as Colonel Tribune, which now it's hard to explain how, right? And he was so young. He was early 20s, right? Yeah. Maybe his first job out of college. Just tweeting as one of the founders of the Tribune, and started hosting tweet ups. And it was when you would go to something for the sole purpose of, we use the same website. Not we use the website and we're interested in the same things. It was purely, we're the people in Chicago who use Twitter, so we will all meet. And those Chicago Tribune tweet ups absolutely became, I have essentially 2 friend groups in Chicago, and one is friends I made through Twitter and the internet, and the other are friends I've made through synagogue and my Jewish life. Like, those are my 2 large circles of friends here. And ultimately, like, everyone, with the few exception of like a few people from college, they can all go back to one of those 2 core groups.
Yeah, that tracks. There was a lot of overlap between the Apple Store stuff and that, as well as like the comedy community.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause a lot of creatives worked at Apple.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the Colonel Tribune character is kind of an interesting point, because it was supposedly, it was based on Colonel McCormick, who was one of the
Mm-hmm.
founders of the Tribune, but it was a fictionalized version of him.
Yeah.
And it was an illustration that somebody did of a distorted version of him, but wearing a folded paper hat.
Mm-hmm.
That said the Chicago Tribune on it. And then it was just kind of a comedic news character that they used for outreach, and it was quite popular. And it wound up, I wound up meeting a whole bunch of people through that. And then they had on the Chicago Tribune website for a long time was Friends of the Colonel.
Oh yeah.
And I was on there. I think you might have been on there. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of media follows from that. Like, I had a ton of people who just would find that page and then for a very long time would just be like, I don't know who this person is, but they're somehow associated with the Trib. And I wasn't associated with the Trib at that point.
Right.
I did later go on and do some freelancing for the Trib. I was a contract photographer for the real estate section for a little bit, as well as do some stuff for Reida, and was one of the founding people for Chicago Now, which was
right.
A weird experience. But there's, yeah, I was just somebody that they followed and liked. And that fascinating that I wound up being on an official ChicagoTribune.com website page that really I owe a lot of my connections in Chicago to.
Yeah. Yeah, I was explaining to Monica, who I talked to yesterday about Twitter, how my original account at Leah Jones, because of how I joined when I worked at Edelman. I was on a team with Steve Rubel and Phil Gomes, and then so that meant my first group of follows, my first group of mutuals were like Scoble and these tech, like high profile tech bros mostly, in the early days of Twitter. So my original following was people joining and looking at who Scoble's early follows were. And so I got these people following me who are eventually I nuked that account because I was just like, these are not my people. And it's just like, why are any of you following me? And I started from scratch, but it was in part because in the early days, you'd go and look. I would come and look at your account and see who you were following and just follow from your list. And so I had an early boost because of Scoble and Steve Rubel and those types of Twitter users.
It's funny because I find myself doing that on Mastodon now.
Oh, really?
But, yeah. But yeah, that is very true. I think in a lot of ways, the early days of Twitter were just trying to find people, just trying to find other people that were interesting that you wanted to interact with. Yeah. And it's weird because you think at the time we didn't have hashtags, we didn't have retweets, so we definitely didn't have quote tweets. It was 140 characters. What?
We didn't have pictures.
Oh yeah.
You had to go to TwitPic, upload a picture, and then either link your accounts and send a tweet from there, or get the link and come back to Twitter and send a tweet and put the link to your photograph.
Yeah, and we also had to use URL shorteners all the time too.
Right, on our own, we would go to Bitly.
We would go to Bitly, put in our
or
thing,
link
copy
shortener.
and paste it, and then bring it over
Yeah.
because we were really concerned about the number of characters that it was going to use.
Right.
It's funny. I'm still I'm very hasty in when I tweet, and I make a lot of typos. But I will say I've become a much better writer and more succinct thinker because of the technical limitations of Twitter. And I lament even the fact that it went to 280 now. Like, it's been a while now, and it's still it's not that big of a change. It's actually kind of freeing, but 140 was actually really forced me to think about every single character and how you said the things you said them when you said them.
Yeah, like folks was one. If you said people and you needed a character, you switch it to folks. Or, like I had all these little ways of shorthand that I knew, like, these are the substitutions I can make. This is the phrase I can drop. Yeah. And then when I went to grad school 10 years into using Twitter, and I would have to write like a 5-page paper, and I'm like, oh, but I could say this in 1 page. I don't need all this filler. I can say it in 1 page with a bunch of links at the end to back it up, or hyperlinks, but there are no hyperlinks in an academic paper, right? So you can't just link to it and show that you did your research. You have to like actually explain all the ideas. But yeah, I struggled to put more into my writing after. So I agree with you that Twitter made me a very succinct writer.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I through those Tribune things, I met whole groups of people that wound up like it's what allowed me to launch my career in technology. To be perfectly honest, like, I was working at an Apple store because I was a nerd, and I had a design degree, like graphic design, but I didn't love client work. And by meeting people and just being a person who had a camera on them and was photographing people, I wound up building a whole network of people, and I wound up I found myself turning down jobs for agencies and for publications because I was working my Apple store job, and it was all people that I met through Twitter. And I wound up, leaving that job with Apple after 5.5 years, 6.5 years, and just diving headfirst into starting my own business and really doing social media management and technology education and freelance creative stuff. And I was able to do that for 2 years successfully while traveling because of Twitter and other social media. And the only reason I stopped was because I burned myself out on it, because I'm not good at setting boundaries of like when to work and when to not work.
Yeah. And it's so hard when you're a freelancer because the fear of it's a hard lesson to learn, because the fear of this might be the last job, or but it's it's hard. It's just hard.
Yeah. I mean, but it wound up like I wound up having that as a thing I did, and taking what I intended to be like a 9-to-5 job that I didn't have to think about with a small marketing tech company that was 10 people called Active Campaign. And it wound up being like, oops, I fell into a career. And after another 5.5 years there, that went from 10 people to 300
hundreds,
people.
Right?
Yeah. And I think they're over 1,000 these days.
Wow.
They did just have some cuts and some layoffs because of, everyone in tech is doing that because they overhired during the pandemic. But it's weird. It's really weird. And I got to meet a lot of my heroes, like my web design heroes, by connecting with them on Twitter. And then when they would speak at conferences, getting together with them. It really was a very great social tool for in-person interaction more than anything. And that blows me away. That is, the idea that we would get together just because we were on a website is funny and still kind of great. I have a lot of friends that I know from there still to this day. Not just from that time, but like people I've connected with during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Somebody asked me to get coffee to talk about a business venture he was going to have. And we got together for a cup, and we realized that we'd known each other for like 3 years. We had never actually sat in the same room and talked to each other.
Wow.
And that was a little surreal, but it's just because we've known each other through Twitter. And after getting to know each other through Twitter, we, connected on Instagram or whatever else. And it's bizarre. It's bizarre. And I'm really sad about what's happening right now.
I am too.
But I'm kind of, I'm also like, I'm sad about what's happening right now with Twitter since Elon purchased it. And then even last night that he put Trump back on. Though Trump hasn't tweeted yet, but give it time, he will. We're seeing the kind of wholesale destruction of the site. And the moment the deal closed with him, I exported my archive, and I've decided everything from here is bonus. And I am just watching the world burn. I'm resigned to it. Yeah. I'm going down with the ship, and I'm going to have a good time doing it. But it's it's painful. I didn't meet my wife on Twitter, but I found out my wife was following me on Twitter before I met her. Like, and I didn't know that. And it's funny. It's real funny.
But would you have met your wife without Twitter?
No, actually. Right. So that's really funny because you had clients when you did freelancing things. You had Native, and you did social media education training for different freelance artists. And one of the ones that you had was a gentleman who was a good friend of mine named Matt Reida. Matt, I got to know Matt through you. Like we met through you. And we followed each other on Twitter, and he would have shows. I got involved in the rock scene because of it. And I was always involved in rock and roll scenes before this, but I didn't really know where to find it here. And Matt hired me to photograph one of his shows. Who also another musician that was not a client of yours, but in the same circle of people, my friend Jess Godwin. She was opening, so it was like, oh, I'll go to this. And I went to this show, photographing the different bands, and just kept seeing this girl in the corner of my eye, and noticing her and being like, wow, she's really attractive, and she's talking to all these people I know. It's really strange. And at the end of the night, my friend Morgan walked over to me with her. I was like, hey, John, you know Beth Ann? I was like, no, I don't.
I've been watching her all night, and she's the person here I don't know. I would like to know her, please.
Yeah, and I introduced myself, and she said, oh, I've seen you around. And then I learned later, like, she knew who I was. And it's weird. It's super weird. Like, because she knew who I was through social media.
Yeah.
I somehow tricked her into going on a date with me, and then we kept going on dates, and now it'll be in January it'll be 10 years since we met, 10 years since that show.
Oh my gosh.
And we were official pretty quickly after that. So we've been together almost 10 years. And that would not have happened if not for Twitter. Even though her and I didn't meet directly that way, like I would not have known those groups of people if not for her. I mean, if not for Twitter.
That era was super fun because when I was doing Native the first time, I opened it to do social media education for writers, artists, and musicians. Ultimately, it was social media for rock stars and rabbis, because those are the people that would pay me to teach them. And I didn't do social media management because my core belief was that people could learn to do it themselves, and that I would teach them the the basics and the tenets of using social media, and they would be off and running. And so that was like 2009, 2010, and it was a simpler landscape. And that was before Twitter and Facebook were changing their algorithm every day. Man, MySpace was still in the mix. There was a lot. You didn't need to be an expert in advertising algorithms to be a musician who managed their own social media. So at the time, it wasn't bad advice at the time. Now I would never tell a musician to run it on their own, other than to I like when musicians are their own voice on Twitter, but I would never say to do it without someone who understands the technology.
Well,
because it's so complex now.
Yeah, I also think there's a different social dynamic. Like there's a parasocial dynamic that is more of a thing now than it was then, or at least than we understood, of people feeling like they have a real connection with somebody that doesn't know who they are, doesn't know that they exist. And there's a lot of toxicity with that. Like it's, in a lot of ways, if you are a public figure, it's kind of not safe for your mental health, at the very least, to run your own Twitter and to not have somebody do it. There's a YouTuber, former YouTuber and writer that I love by the name of Lindsay Ellis, who makes video essays and writes. She used to make video essays, I should say, and she writes science fiction novels. And she was an early adopter of YouTube and kind of perpetually online, and almost like online too long. Like she was online from a very young age, not a very young age, but early 20s. And there's a long tail to the history of her presence, and she's evolved and changed and become a more progressive and different person. And she kind of got harassed off of the internet by both the left and the right for just not always having the right take. And I'm not a big fan of I actually really hate the phrase like the woke mob. I think it's a dismissive and stupid way of, I think it lacks nuance. But she eventually was in a place where she was regularly receiving death threats and burning herself out and becoming very clearly a worse version of herself. And I don't know Lindsay personally, but anyone who was interacting with her and saw her could see this. And eventually she deleted all of her stuff, but she's a published author. And so there's things in her contracts that are like, you still need to do this. And so her Twitter account has been vacant for a while. And just the other day, somebody posted from it. It was like, hey, just so you know, Lindsay is now on Mastodon and TikTok and all these other places, but it's written in the third person. And it's like, oh, you know what? Lindsay's no longer controlling her accounts. She's paying someone to control her accounts and setting that boundary. And that's probably good. It's especially hard, I'm imagining, to be a woman on the internet, but it's a fascinating thing to be a public figure on the internet. And I, as much as my handle is quote unquote local celebrity, and I do face backlash. I mean, I did get a push notification here while I'm sitting here that apparently Libs of Chicago retweeted me with a dig at me, which I didn't notice until just now. Which if Libs of Chicago, in the same vein of Libs of TikTok, just being an alt-right troll account. I am enough of a public figure in that regard in the local political world, local activism world, where I get real stuff on here, and I have to kind of worry about some of the ramifications of it. I can't imagine being somebody with millions of followers. And wanting to have an opinion on anything and live a public life. Sorry, I didn't mean to take it to a dark place. I love Twitter.
No, it's, but it's very real. And we have a lot of mutual friends who are much more famous on the internet than we are, and who have really dealt with some of the worst. behavior from people. And it's so scary.
I still believe in the power of the internet as a democratizing force, but I don't have the same confidence in that I used to have. It sometimes just allows, like, the belief that it allows people to connect is a good idea, but actually I think there's real problems with what we've done with algorithms. Like, I think 10 years ago everyone was like, oh, the Netflix recommendation engine is so great. It always knows what movie I want to watch next. And that's so cool. And then everything copied that, and it all just put us in our own little echo chambers. And as we've seen with YouTube and other places, that it can actually just be a force for radicalization. It was like, oh, you like videos about structure fires? Well, let me tell you why 9/11 was an inside job. It's like,
the YouTube algorithm will get you from whatever you like, if you just let it run, to white nationalism and radical videos. I mean, I think within like
Flat
10
Earth.
to 15 videos, it's so fast.
Yeah. Flat Earth,
if you
anti-vaxxing.
just follow, yeah.
And I think there's something really dangerous to recommendation engines of just trying to serve up people with things that we think people would like. And what I loved about Twitter for so long was that I could just follow people selectively, and I could have my sort of people be chronological, and I don't have to have it too heavily influenced by the algorithm. But that is extremely hard for advertisers. It's extremely it's one of the reasons Twitter has struggled, is that they've never found a really good advertising model. Whereas Facebook just objectively was like, oh, you like that? Screw you. You're going to like this better. And they had the numbers to back that up. Even if we all think we don't like it, we all do like having these things served up for us on a platter, or at least it sparks engagement. And engagement is the metric they go by. But the things that spark engagement are mostly rage. And it pushes people to their corners. It pushes it into echo chambers of belief. And it can be really bad. Whereas the best days on Twitter are the days where it was like, the dress is black and white.
Yeah.
Oh, what is it? No, it was black. It was blue and black, or white and gold. Blue and black. And by the way, it was a blue and black dress. Like, actually, if you saw the dress in person, the actual dress that was photographed, I don't care what your opinion is of the photograph. It was a blue and black dress.
Yeah. I was able to see it in both ways, just kind of by softening my eyes, or what I would look at, like, I look over here where there's bright, and then I look at it and I'd see it one way. But wasn't dress day, wasn't it that also the same day the two llamas escaped?
Yes.
Right? Like, that was
the same day.
A great day on Twitter, because it was the dress debate, and also there were two llamas on the loose.
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
But that was like that sort of nonsense, the collective gazing into the stupidity and laughing at it was the best thing about Twitter.
Yeah.
And we are far from that these days. And I don't know what the solution is. Because I do think recommendation engines that silo people, and I do think that people being only surrounded by like-minded voices is problematic. But I don't think the solution is like, well, let's just see what these Nazis have to say. No, that's a really bad idea. Let's maybe just not platform fascists. But also, it's requires more nuance than that, right? Like, I don't want to just be exposed to things that I hate and beliefs that I oppose, but I do want to interact with things I don't understand and don't agree with.
I think one of the things that has been most powerful for me using Twitter is being able to stand at the edge of Black Twitter and listen and learn, and then like quietly investigate my own internal racism, and like understanding Ferguson and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement through Twitter, and being able to like essentially be in a room, shut my mouth, listen, get to know the players, get to know journalists, with like the only cost of entry was like a Twitter account, and then learning not to insert myself in conversations, but following people, listening, learning. And the same has been true for Asian American groups, and trying to really make sure I understand. I don't think I would have any understanding of like gender queer and trans rights without Twitter.
Totally.
Like all of these issues that we're able to sit ourselves next to the conversation and listen and teach ourselves and grab the links and make mutual aid donations. Like that for me, I think I know I would be progressive without Twitter, but I don't think I would be as educated as I am, knowing there's so much more to learn.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. I've become a much more open-minded, progressive person because of Twitter.
Yeah.
I think I had it leveled the playing field for me as a very privileged white cis male, right? I'm fortunate that I had good people in my life who liked me enough to put up with my bullshit, but also to expose me to other things. And Twitter played a huge part of that. And I'm very grateful. I think even, prior to Twitter, I had a lot of internalized misogyny, internalized bigotry, internalized homophobia, racism. I mean, I still do. We all do, conscious or unconscious. And I think anyone who thinks they don't probably has way more than than anybody else. But it has expanded my horizons of what it is to be a human, and really to realize that it's not, a lot of these things really don't matter. And they certainly don't matter to me what anyone else does, and how they live their lives. And Black Lives Matter was a real moment for me, in the first time around, not the George Floyd stuff, which huge, but I mean, I through Twitter, I connected with a bunch of people, and we started a group called Podcast Club. And we would get together and we would listen to podcasts weekly, monthly. And I got to know a good cross section of different people that I adore. And somebody would curate a list, and we'd get together at a bar and talk about the list of shows, and what we thought about it. And it forced different perspectives. That would have never happened had I not known these people from Twitter. And then I got to connect, even though I didn't know all of the people who were in Podcast Club right away, I got to know them. I followed them on Twitter, and they exposed me to different resources and different opinions and different perspectives. And it dragged me into being a kinder, compassionate version of myself, which I'm extremely grateful for. So it also really taught me to not center my suffering, center myself in other people's suffering, which is funny.
It's a hard lesson.
Well, I mean, it's a hard lesson, and it's a hard lesson that I forget sometimes that people haven't learned. I do think I have a really funny point about the blue checks. That's a different story, though.
Let's hear it.
So, talking about fun, stupid Twitter, like the two llamas in the dress. They're in the late aughts. Well, I think from like 2010 to 2013, 2014, there was a musical on Broadway about Spider-Man. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. And it was Julie Taymor, who was famous for the Lion King musical, as well as that Beatles movie, Across the Universe. And she got the rights with U2, Bono, and The Edge to make a Spider-Man musical, and it was a horrific mess. And it's very interesting. Go look it up on YouTube. There's incredible reporting around it. And I've always been fascinated by this thing that happened, and I picked up a book about it by one of the writers of the show, a guy named Glenn Berger. And I was reading the bonkers story about how this happened. This was around 2017, maybe 2016. I was reading the story of how this musical came to be and all the failures of it. And I was reading it on the CTA, and I would tweet lines from it, lines from the book.
Yeah.
And I would tag the musical because it had a Twitter account. And one day I went to go tag it, and it didn't exist any longer.
Oh.
And I was fascinated by this. And so I looked it up, and it looked like the marketing agency that had been hired by somebody to run the presence of Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark had deleted the Twitter account. So I went and I re-registered it. And I went to the Internet Archive, and I pulled down the photographs and the profile photos and the background images, and I re-registered Spidey on B-Way. And I started tweeting from this Broadway musical. And it has been a force for chaos in a lot of ways. It's my alt Twitter handle that I just do stupid things on. And I get all these theater nerd kids. Lots of LGBTQ trans kids that are super into this musical. It's fascinating to me. And it is just this funny place where I kind of, what they call shitpost, what the kids call shitpost. Well, recently, Chief Twit, Lord Master Elon Musk, decided that he was going to let people for $8 buy Twitter verification. And so I said, how funny would it be if for $8 I made the Spidey on B-Way and authenticated a blue check Twitter account and start tweeting from it as if the musical's actually coming back.
Oh, John.
And I did. And I went mini viral in New York City theater Twitter. And like a bunch of days ago, there was the whole thing about someone from a fake Eli Lilly account saying that insulin was going to be free, and that someone from a Nintendo account posting Mario giving the finger. In a smaller, more niche corner of the internet, at Spidey on B-Way announced that it was returning to Broadway in 2023, and all of these theater reviewers started responding to it, and knowing that it was fake, they immediately figured it out because my bio.
You make it clear.
I make it clear, and I wasn't. I just wanted to make, get some laughs out there for it.
Yeah.
But I got people from Playbill retweeting me like, I now understand the true evil of the $8 verifications. And actually, the next day after everything that happened, Playbill officially announced that they are no longer having. They abandoned Twitter. They've shut down all of their Twitter accounts.
Wow.
Time Out Magazine retweeted me. Like, all of these accounts started engaging with me and getting a real kick out of it. But it's so dumb. And I chose a harmless way to do this. And my point was, like, this is not safe. This is a really bad idea. And I'm going to exemplify this in the dumbest way I can possibly do so. And it was honestly the best $8 I've ever spent. I canceled it immediately, so I still have I have the blue check for the remainder of the month, but I won't have it. It won't renew. It was just for the joke and to help point out how bad of an idea this was.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun. It was so much fun, and I didn't get banned. I didn't get any trouble for it
because it was too niche.
Well,
you weren't making fun of Elon. It didn't affect
I was too, but that's a different story.
I mean, you were, but like you didn't tag him in it. You didn't rename yourself Elon, and you didn't you're not being pinned with the responsibility of crashing a stock.
Right. I did very briefly. Somebody who is a executive for Disney Junior retweeted me and said, "Oh, I see the blue check. The blue check thing is going really well." And I responded to him, and I was like, "Hey, please don't sue me, Mr. Disney person. Like, I really appreciate you." And he deleted his tweet. Like, he probably realized, like, oh, like there might be other people who take issue with me acknowledging this. So
yeah,
real funny.
I love it. Yeah, weird Twitter was good Twitter. Yeah,
and I still like that account's gonna exist, and I'm still gonna post dumb stuff from it, but I'm not expecting. I don't want anyone to think it's actually real, and I don't want anyone to think that the musical is actually coming back.
Right.
But, yeah, I did have some people who were very upset because they were excited at the idea of it coming back, which was a very interesting prospect.
Well, John, thanks for kicking off your birthday with me.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
You'll come back and we'll talk about activism because I want to hear the whole story.
Yeah. What I will say, and one of the things keeping me on Twitter is the fact that there are a lot of public officials, politicians, civil servants, and journalists on there. And I think as long as those people continue to exist on Twitter, there is reason to have an account to engage with them because it can be a real great force for organizing. And I think there's a time and place that it will come to delete an account. But I think for now, there's not a replacement social graph, and it's a good place to connect and find other people. And there's some really amazing activism going on in Chicago that is mostly stemming out of Twitter. The bike community especially is doing
absolutely
phenomenal things. And I'm real sad at the prospect of losing that. So, but I'd love to tell you about 4715 Northwestern and Built Housing Now and all of the other things that we're doing, as well as my personal spat with MWRD Commissioner Carrie Steele and the crazy things that came from that.
Metropolitan Water?
Yeah. Some lawyer for her political campaign when she was running for Cook County Assessor was tasked with going through 10 years of my Twitter account. And it came up in a public hearing. And I find that to be so hilarious that somebody was paid to do that. Yeah. Anyway, that's a story. That's a story for another day.
Yes. Where can people find you on the internet?
The best place to find me, if you go to subism.com, subism.com/links. It's my own little site there that I've got. Subism.com is my site. It's my main site. But /links has all my little places that you can find me wherever you want to go. So that's you'll find my Mastodon account. You'll find my Tumblr account. You'll find my, anything I'm up to. I keep that up to date. It's like Linktree, but I made it myself of just here's a list of links. And so it's never goes stale. I always keep it up to date. You can find me on whatever place is on fire or not on fire at the time.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you so much, Leah, and have a great day.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.